Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Emmy, and we are presenting the He et al. Paper, which is False Belief Understanding in 2.5-year-olds, Evidence from Violations of Expectation, Change of Location, and Unexpected Content Tasks. So in our presentation today, we're going to start with our main question and move into background. This will be then followed by experiments 1 and 2, where we'll then conclude with takeaways and our discussion questions. So for the main question from our paper, the researchers want to know, can the ability for children to attribute false beliefs emerge before year 4 of age through the use of spontaneous response tasks? So they want to know, like, how young can children be able to attribute these false beliefs? So for some background information, there was an assumption that children might not be able to attribute these false beliefs until they hit the age of 4. This came from traditionally elicited responses, so direct questions about someone's false beliefs. And this was done by multiple researchers such as Callahan and Perner and Wilmer in 1983. However, newer results have been showing that there might be the emergence of this skill at a younger age. And then previous research was just understanding false beliefs was just with location itself, but now new research is looking at just false perceptions or false beliefs about identity. Additionally, they traditionally use a VO or violation of expression task, and this is looking to see if children just look longer at something that might be inconsistent with what they think, as well as AL or anticipatory looking tasks, which is just to see if children can anticipate where something might be. And traditionally, the VO task has been used in 2-year-olds, so younger children, whereas the AL task was just used in older children. So now we're trying to look at that. And so looking at our specific question, based on the research, they're wondering if a child is presented this change of location scenario, how might they react with the VO task, right? How would they be looking at something that might be inconsistent? So now we'll move into experiment 1. So we're going to start by just describing the apparatus. So right now you're looking from the child's point of view. Here, the researcher is off to the right. The agent, as they call it, or the person who's going to be modeling behavior, is going to be tasked to say where the toy is being moved, is in the back. This display case was mounted kind of on the floor. The child was seated in the parent's lap, facing this apparatus. White paint was used on the walls, as well as the ground appeared kind of granite color. And then the experimenters wore different colored shirts to be able to differentiate. So there were 54 English-speaking 2.5-year-olds, 28 of which were male. So while the parents weren't compensated to do anything, they were compensated like transportation. So here they did have 3 different conditions being studied. And then 2 familiarization trials occurred, and then 1 test trial. So here is the familiarization trials. In the false belief and ignorance trials for familiarization, the agent, or the person at the back window, would have 2 containers in front of them. The agent would be exposed to the toy being hidden in the left box or the right box, and the curtain would close. Then the curtain would be opened again. The agent would be asked, where's the toy? And they would point. And then the same events happened for the knowledge condition. However, the curtain was open the whole time. So the agent was exposed to seeing where the toy was moved and everything. And so that is the main difference. So now for the false belief condition, the test trial was very similar to the familiarization. However, when the curtain was closed, the toy was moved. So in the points left trial, the toy would be hidden in the left container. But then when the curtain was closed, the toy was moved to the right container. When asked where the toy was, the agent would point to the left box, or what would be called kind of the wrong container, or the container that was just with their previous belief that it was in the left side, because that's all they could see. In the points right trial, the toy was hidden in the left, and then when the curtain was closed, moved to the right container. But when the agent was asked where to point, they pointed at the right container. So even though the toy was there, they technically shouldn't have known it was there because it was done behind the curtain. For the knowledge condition, it was the same thing. However, the agent was exposed the whole time. So when they were asked again to point, they would either point left or point right, depending on which trial. And then for the ignorance condition, the toy was placed in the container and then taken immediately out, and then the curtain was closed, where then the experimenter would move it to the left container. So when the curtain was open and it was pointing left or pointing right, the person had no clue. The whole point of ignorance was to kind of mix it up, so that the agent technically would have no idea what's going on. And so for the results, for the false belief trial, so those who had the point right trial looked longer. The children looked longer than those who had the point left trial. In the knowledge condition, those who had the point left trial looked longer. So the children, again, looked longer than those who had the point right. For the ignorance trial, children looked equally from the left and from the right. And so these make sense with their hypothesis of children can kind of pick up on false beliefs. So for the false belief condition, children thought that the agent would point to the left side because the agent had never seen the toy moved, so they just went with what they already knew. For the knowledge experiment, children assumed that the agent would point to where the toy had been moved because they had seen everything. And then for the ignorance, truly, it was just meant to kind of be confusing. So yes, the children were equally confused because the agent had no clue where the toy was. And now on to experiment 2.
Experiment 2 served as an extension of experiment 1. So while experiment 1 focused on how 2.5-year-olds can attribute false belief to a change in location, this experiment focused on whether toddlers can attribute false belief to a change in contents or materials. So for experiment 2, the same apparatus was used here as was used in experiment 1. So just like in experiment 1, the child was sitting in their parent's lap facing the opening of the apparatus. So the same green curtain was used to indicate when the agent could and could not see the changes that the experimenter was making. And so in this experiment, the participants were 48 English-speaking 2.5-year-olds, 25 which were male. Children were randomly assigned to either the false belief, the knowledge, or the reverse false belief conditions, and 16 children were in each group. And within each condition, half were assigned to either the eat group and the other half were assigned to the color group. So while the apparatus was the same, the primary difference here in this experiment was the stimuli. So the stimuli included 2 transparent plastic trays, a box of crayons, and a box of Cheerios. And so during the familiarization phase, the experimenter emptied the Cheerios and the crayons into each of the trays, and then switched these trays, and then placed the crayons inside of the Cheerio box and the Cheerios inside of the crayon box. And these familiarization trials were slightly different depending on the condition. So in addition to these familiarization trials, 2 test trials were included in each condition to test whether the toddlers would be able to attribute these false beliefs. And so during these trials, there were 2 groups, as I mentioned, the eat and the color group. The setup was the same as the start of each trial, was similar to that of the familiarization trial. So during the initial phase for this eat group, the agent first opened the curtain so that they could see both the crayons and the Cheerios and said, "I want to eat, I'll get the Cheerios," while looking neutrally at a mark on the floor of the apparatus. And the agent did this to avoid showing a bias towards one package over the other. And then during the final phase, the agent said over and over again, "Here they are," as they pointed to the Cheerio box during the matching box trial or to the crayon box during the non-matching box trial. And for the color group, during the initial phase for this group, the agent opened the curtain similarly to in the eat group and essentially said, "I want a color and I'll get the crayons," while looking neutrally at the floor of the apparatus. And during the final phase, instead of saying, "I want to eat," they said, "Here they are," as they pointed to the Cheerio box during the non-matching trial or the crayon box during the matching trial. And so these test trials were standard across all 3 conditions. So transitioning to the methods in the false belief condition. So during the familiarization trial in this condition, only the experimenter was present. The agent was therefore not able to see the experimenter make the switch. The switch consisted of placing the Cheerios in the crayon box and the crayons in the Cheerio box. And so during the test trials, the agent then entered the scene announcing that she wanted to eat if she was in the eat group or the color group, or that they wanted to color if they were in the color group, and then reached for one of these packages. In the knowledge condition, during the familiarization trial, the agent was able to watch the experimenter make the switch, and this switch consisted again of placing the Cheerios in the crayon box and the crayons in the Cheerio box. And during these test trials, the agent entered the scene and announced that she either wanted to eat if the child was in the eat group, or color if they're in the color group, and then similarly reach for one of the packages. And lastly, so different from experiment 1, this is a new condition. The reverse false belief condition was implemented in experiment 2. So during this condition, instead of just receiving one familiarization trial, the agent received 2. And so the first trial was the same as the knowledge condition, where the agent was present and therefore they could see the experimenter switch by placing the Cheerios in the crayon and the crayons in the Cheerio box. And then during the second trial, the agent was actually absent and the experimenter switched back the crayons and the Cheerios so that they were placed back into their original boxes. And so in this instance, during the second switch, the agent could not see the experimenter. And so during the test trials, the agent then entered the scene and announced that they either wanted to eat or color, depending on which group the child was in, and then reached for one of the packages. So for the results, looking at the graph, we can see the mean looking times of children across all 3 conditions during the final phase of the matching and non-matching box test trials, when the agent announced that they wanted what they wanted and pointed to one of the packages. So children in the false belief condition looked reliably longer during the non-matching box than the matching box trial. So in other words, for children in the false belief condition, they spent a longer time looking when the agent pointed to the Cheerios in the crayon box or the crayons in the Cheerio box. And then in the knowledge condition, children looked reliably longer during the matching box than the non-matching box trial. In other words, children in the knowledge condition spent a much longer time looking when the agent pointed to the Cheerios in the Cheerio box or the crayons in the crayon box. And lastly, children in the reverse false belief condition looked reliably longer during the matching box than the non-matching box trial. In other words, children in the reverse false belief condition spent a longer time when the agent pointed to the Cheerios in the Cheerio box or the crayons in the crayon box. And so these results support the author's hypotheses that children would have these expectations by taking note of what the agent could and could not observe from the experimenter. Transitioning to our main takeaways. So our first takeaway is that 2.5-year-olds can attribute false beliefs about both the location of objects and their content. So while previous evidence has indicated that children start to succeed at elicited response false belief tests involving a change of location and a change of content around age 4, these results ultimately reveal that 2.5-year-olds can succeed at spontaneous response tasks in these same situations. Second, young children can distinguish between mistaken and ignorant agents because they react differently. So these results challenge the ignorance interpretation, which indicates that young children do distinguish between mistaken and ignorant agents. So rather than thinking they're the same, children are able to expect mistaken agents to act in accordance with their false beliefs and ignorant agents to act randomly, at least in these situations that are explored. So children in the false belief and ignorance conditions of experiment 1 produce distinct looking patterns, indicating that they do respond differently when the agent held a false belief or when they were just merely ignorant about the toy's location and thus didn't really know where to look and thought that the agent's choices were random. And third, toddlers' use of all cognitively available facts. They use all cognitively available facts when attributing false beliefs to others. So for example, in the reverse false belief condition, the children made note of the fact that the agent was present when the contents of the packages were switched and that they were then absent when the contents were placed back into their original packages. So in this condition, children did expect the agent to falsely believe the contents of the Cheerio in the crayon boxes were switched because the agent didn't see that the experimenter had then switched them back. So children were able to make note of this. And super interestingly, the authors noted in the discussion that these findings provide an alternative method for assessing late signing deaf children and children with autism. So the authors noted this finding because children who are a part of these populations often fail elicited response false belief tests. So because VOE tests have fewer extraneous components than elicited response tests, ascertaining whether or not these children perform better in these tests might provide really important information about their psychological reasoning abilities of these populations. Transitioning into our discussion questions, we will have these posted, but we can also read them off here so that you have an idea. So first, how might this be related to real world concerning attention and what these children might be looking at and thinking through? So how much does the environment play a role in this task? Second, why is it important that children as young as 2.5 are able to make these distinctions? And what might this imply about the theory of mind? And then for experiment 2, they used Cheerios and crayons. Why these 2 stimuli, and what if there were others in place or even a third stimulus introduced? And lastly, what does this false belief attribution say about the child's mind, and why are they supposedly able to distinguish false beliefs in a researcher? Awesome, thank you guys so much. We really look forward to our discussion on Wednesday, and we hope that you enjoyed our presentation.